Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki Jaya. Nanda Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Jaya. Nitai Gauda Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the lotus feet to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. So, I'd first like to begin by expressing my deep gratitude and appreciation to all the devotees here for amazing service, such beautiful dressing of the deities, and wonderful hospitality, and always such a warm and loving mood and atmosphere. So, I feel very grateful and honored to be here. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, although I'm very disqualified in so many ways. So before I begin, I would first like to seek blessings from all of the assembled Vaishnavas that you see fit. Please bestow your mercy upon me so that I can speak something relevant and bona fide from the pages of the Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam. Only by the mercy of Vaishnavas is anything possible, so I am therefore seeking your blessings.
If it's disturbance with the baby, anyone is disturbed, I can take it off just to prove it.
Okay, no problem. So we're continuing from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 9th canto. Anyone knows the title of the 9th canto?
I got it from the computer. It's cheating a little bit.
It's what?
It's cheating a little bit. I have it on the computer.
Oh, it's cheating a little bit. No problem. What is it?
Liberation.
Yeah, so the title of the 9th canto is Liberation. Very interesting canto, leading, considering it's the last canto before you come to the 10th canto. And actually a lot of very delicate topic matters discussed in the 9th canto, predominantly known for the pastimes of Lord Ram, but that's actually a relevant, relatively insignificant part of the 9th canto, and the topic liberation. And we're reading from the 6th chapter, and the title of the 6th chapter.
Chapter is
The downfall of Shobari Muni.
The downfall of Subari Muni. So yes, and I think today we actually begin the pastime of Subari Muni. So like that, we're reading text 39 to 40. It's two texts. Is there just one on the board? Yeah, just the first one, 39 is on the board, right? Yeah, okay. So before we begin, if you could please repeat the invocation. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 Yamunantar Jale Magnas. Yamunantar Jale Magnas. Apyamana Param Tapaha. Apyamana Param Tapaha. Nivritam Mina Rajasya. Nivritam Mina Rajasya. Drishva Maituna Dharminaha. Drishva Maituna Dharminaha. Yamunantar Jale Magnas. Yamunantar Jale Magnas. Yamana Param Tapaha. Yamana Param Tapaha. Nivritim Mina Rajasya. Nivritim Mina Rajasya. Drishva Maituna Dharminaha. Drishva Maituna Dharminaha. Yamunantar Jale Magnas. Yamunantar Jale Magnas. Apyamana Param Tapaha. Apyamana Param Tapaha. Nivritim Mina Rajasya. Nivritim Mina Rajasya. Drishtva Maituna Dharminaha. Drishtva Maituna Dharminaha.
Yamunantar Jale Magnas.
Yamunantar Jale Magnas.
Tasyamana Param Tapaha.
Tasyamana Param Tapaha.
Nivritim Mina Rajasya.
Nivritim Mina Rajasya.
Drishva Maituna Dharminaha.
Drishva Maituna Dharminaha. Yamunantar Jale Magnas. Yamunantar Jale Magnas. Tapyamana Param Tapaha. Tapyamana Param Tapaha. Nirvritim Mina Rajasya. Nirvritim Mina Rajasya. Drishva Maituna Dharminaha. Drishva Maituna Dharminaha.
Yamunantar Jale Magnas.
Yamunantar Jale Magnas.
Tapyamanam Param Tapaha.
Tapyamana Param Tapaha.
Nivritim Mina Rajasya.
Nivritim Mina Rajasya.
Drishva Maituna Dharminaha.
Drishva Maituna Dharminaha.
Ladies, please.
Yamunantar Jale Magnas.
Yamunantar Jale Magnas.
Tasyamana Param Tapaha.
Tapyamana Param Tapaha.
Nivritim Mina Rajasya.
Nirvritim Mina Rajasya.
Vishwamai Tunakaranimaha.
Okay, so there is another verse after that. I'll just read the Sanskrit and we'll do the word for word. Jata spriho nripam vipra kanyamekam mayachataha sokyaha griyatam brahman kaman kanya swayambare. Word for word. Jamuna antajale. In the deep water of the river Jamuna.
In the deep water of the river Yamuna.
Magnaha. Merged completely. Tapyamanaha. Executing austerities. Aram. Uncommon. Tapaha. Austerity. Nirvritim. Pleasure. Minarajasya. Of a big fish. Drishtva. Seeing. Maitunadarminaha. Engaged in sexual affairs. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki Jaya. Subari Rishi was engaged in austerity deep in the water of the river Jamuna when he saw a pair of fish engaged in sexual affairs. Thus, he perceived the pleasure of sex life, and induced by this desire, he went to King Mandata and begged for one of the king's daughters. In response to this request, the king said, "O Brahmana, any of my daughters may accept any husband according to her personal selection." Purport by Srila Prabhupada. This is the beginning of the story of Subari Rishi. According to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Mandata was the king of Mathura, and Subari Rishi was engaged in austerity while submerged deep within the river Jamuna. When the Rishi felt sexual desire, he emerged from the water and went to King Mandata to ask that one of the king's daughters become his wife. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militangena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Gena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Gurun Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sarvetam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavanishwari Ambishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Vipa Sindhu Yevacha Patitana Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So the verse again. Yamunantar jale magnas tapyamana param tapa nirvritim mina rajasya drishtramaituna dharminaha jatasprihon repam vipra kanyam ekam ayachata sopyaha griyatam brahman kaman kanya swayam vade. Subari Rishi was engaged in austerity deep in the water of the river Jamuna when he saw a pair of fish engaged in sexual affairs. Thus he perceived the pleasure of sex life, and induced by this desire he went to King Mandata and begged for one of the king's daughters. In response to this request, the king said, "O Brahmana, any of my daughters may accept any husband according to her personal selection." Hare Krishna. Would you give your blessings to begin? I seeked blessings earlier, but you weren't in the room, so now I feel. And Prabhuji. Please forgive me for sitting on this big seat, raised platform in front of three exalted Mataji. Also, everyone here is so exalted in purpose. Like Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, I feel like an animal in the zoo on display for everyone to kind of look at. So please forgive me. I'll try to speak something relevant and bona fide. So this is the beginning of this pastime, although quite far into the chapter, which is entitled The Downfall of Subari Rishi. And we see here that Subari Rishi was engaged in great austerity in a holy place. Actually, it's described that Mandata Maharaj, he was the king of which place? Which district? Of Mathura. So he's the king of Mathura. So what a wonderful place. And Subari Rishi is obviously a sadhu, a sage in the Mathura district. And now he's performing his austerities in none other than the holiest of holy rivers in the Jamuna. So there he is in a holy place, performing austerity and taking long bath in the Jamuna for however many years. I think it says several years one place and hundreds years in other places. So for many years he was performing austerities. And what an advanced personality Subari Rishi must have been to be able to perform austerity underwater for so many years. It's difficult enough to stay awake for an hour and a half or 2 hours while chanting japa in the temple room or anywhere else, to speak of stay, alive while submerged underwater. And so Subari Rishi, obviously a very advanced yogi, advanced personality in many ways. But then even amidst all of this auspiciousness, somehow or other, by just seeing two fish engaged in copulating, Subari Rishi's mind became disturbed. And because his meditation was broken and he became overwhelmed by lust, then he broke off his austerities and he came out of the Jamuna and immediately went to the king and begged for his daughter's hand in marriage. So we can see the power of the senses, and especially the power of maitun dharminaha. So this word, engaged in sexual affairs, the allurement of sex life in the material world. As Srila Prabhupada would often say that the entire material world is simply going on by sex desire. Everything is continuing in this world by sex desire. I don't know if they have that here in France, but when you're young, they have sex desire in France? I had heard a few things, but I wasn't sure. Maybe to first check. Yes. So I don't know if they have something else, but in English, at least, when you're young, they say that when the parents are meant to teach you about sex life, they call it, they're going to teach you about the birds and the bees. You've heard this before? Anyone in France, they don't have something similar? Yeah. I've still yet to figure out exactly what it means. But my understanding is similar thing, that the entire creation is going on, even amongst the animal species, amongst the plant species. Everything is cross-pollinating. The birds, it's springtime, right? Actually, I was so happy this morning. Namacharya Prabhu, he called me over to that window and he said, I heard that in the summertime, Krishna's flute has the sound of singing birds. And I thought, isn't that so beautiful? Then he opened the door and I was just transported into this magical universe, because outside all of these birds were just like singing. And of course, in London, you don't get so many birds singing. Different kind of birds. But if you hear like one bird, like when we walk to the temple for Mangalarti, if you hear one or two birds chirping along the way, it's like, a sign of some life other than city life. But here it's like it was hundreds singing. So this idea of when we're young, of course, Prabhupada also explains how, it's probably a Western thing, but this idea of sex education. And I don't know if they have it in school here, but definitely when I was growing up, they have a point at which I think you're probably around 13, 12, 13, 14. You have a class that is actually sex education. But Prabhupada would often say, you don't really need to educate people. They kind of figure it out on their own. It's a natural impulse that comes, and I'm sure even if you never gave a sex education class, it would still, people would figure it out for themselves. So it's kind of a very natural instinct. Of course, we hear in many ways the derogatory sense of sex life. We were discussing the other day about how, of course, in one sense, our aim is to give up this principle of sex life, because it's lust is the all-devouring enemy of the jiva. This desire to lust can be compared to either, often we relate it to the attraction for another person, to enjoy or exploit them in some sort of sexual way. But lust, the principle of lust is not just that, it's actually the strong desire to enjoy or exploit someone or something for one's own personal pleasure or gratification. So lust is not limited just to the principle of sexual engagement, but just the strong desire to exploit the material energy in any way for our own pleasure. This is a symptom of lust, and lust is meant to be given up. Interestingly enough, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that he himself is sex life. Krishna declares that he is sex life, but he is that sex life that is according to religious principles. So sometimes we have to be very careful to understand things in balance, because there can be derogatory context around sex life, but we see that Krishna himself declares that he is sex life. So sex life is not something that's completely, if you engage in it, you should be banished away. That's not the idea. Otherwise, none of us would be here. Of course, that might not be such a bad thing in certain terms, to not be in the material world. I was at a newcomers program in Canterbury the other day, and one new person was there, and I had made a comment in the class that we should offer our appreciation to our parents, because they're like our first gurus, and they brought us into this world and they teach us so much. And afterwards, he was a brand new person, and he was debating with me, why should I offer respect to my parents? And I thought, yes, this is Western culture in its epitome. And he said, I didn't ask them to bring me into this world. They brought me into this world. They decided to do whatever they did, and they created me. And then, I suffer because of it. I was thinking, wow, this guy's pretty kind of advanced in certain ways. But I tried to explain to him, yes, your parents may have engaged in order to bring you into the world, but you had an existence before they performed that. You're not just some material creation of semen and ovum that have come together, and then you're just like, that's not all there is to you. There's more to you than just this physical body. There's you, the spirit soul, and you had a destination to reach before they engaged in any of their activities. It just so happens that by your karma, you wound up in the womb of your mother, and you, not the body, but you, that soul, and therefore, you've come out and you're getting lessons and opportunities to grow and to make progress. Of course, he debated very heavily with this. But somewhere inside he was accepting some things. But the principle is that sex life performed according to religious principles is something that's wanted. In fact, it's something that's needed. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he made this famous statement that he would have sex hundreds of times. Now remember, he's a Naishtika brahmachari. He said he would have sex hundreds of times if he could produce Krishna-conscious children. I often say amongst our community of devotees in London, whenever they come to me and say that we're going to have a baby, I say, well, if you can't make devotees, then you gotta make devotees. Might not get that. It means usually we make devotees by going out and distributing books or going on Harinam, but you can also make devotees by reproduction. That's a very nice word. Thank you. I'll use that one from now on. Yes, reproduction. So like that, we can also make devotees. So, sex life is not something to be, in one sense, shunned away from, as long as we engage with it in the proper manner. We were discussing the other day, or I was hearing one lecture, and it was being described how we can see that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he was very, very strict, especially after taking sannyas. Now, of course, before that, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was married twice. But then he took sannyas, and after taking sannyas, he wouldn't be in the company of members of the opposite sex. In fact, it's described ladies would offer their obeisances from a distance, out of respect. And interesting, there's a lot of culture also in this verse that we'll try to touch upon, but out of respect, the ladies would keep distance from the person in the renounced order. Not sometimes we may see it when, especially from Western culture, we hear about this separation between men and women. But actually it's done out of respect. A lady will know that of course in all animal species, one of the animals is more beautiful. And mostly in the animal species, it's the male animal that is the most attractive and alluring. You can always spot, if you think the bird that is the most attractive should be the female. But it's actually almost always the male. Just for example, the peacock, we use the peacock feather. But that beautiful peacock, that's the male. He's showing off his beautiful tail, and they do their dance. Usually the men, they do the dance to allure. Even if you ever see two pigeons, the male pigeon does his little thing. It's the male amongst the animal species is usually the most attractive animal or attractive person in the two. But amongst humans, it's usually the female. Now, nothing against the men here. You're all very beautiful, but of course, generally the ladies are known as the fairer sex, or the better half of the men. And so therefore, amongst the human species, usually it's ladies who are more attractive. So in the name of chastity, usually a lady will kind of keep her head covered and keep herself distant from, especially those in the renounced order, as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would say. It wasn't that the ladies were being forced with a stick to the back of the room. Out of natural courtesy and respect, they were actually keeping a distance from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in a mood of chastity, to maintain their own chastity, and because they're chaste, and also to maintain the chastity of those who are in the renounced order. In fact, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that one shouldn't even look at the wooden form of a doll, that's in the form of a lady, because it can be so mentally disturbing. As we see here, Sobari Muni, a very advanced yogi, just by seeing two fish engaging in sex life. Now, certainly I experienced lust, but I can't imagine being disturbed by two fish. But this is the power of the material energy. The power of the material energy. That even we can be so advanced in our austerities, but just by seeing. And many sadhus, who was it that just heard the tinkling of the ankle bells of Vishwamitra Muni? Yes. And it was Menaka, yes. Yeah, the tinkling of the ankle. So just you hear the tinkle bells, I said the ankle bells tinkling, and the mind begins to imagine what those bells are attached to. It's like maybe we should think, of a cowbell and remember the cow, but you hear the tinkling of the ankle bells, and all of a sudden it starts with the ankles and it goes from there. And so Vishwamitra had fall down from just that. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he also, we were discussing yesterday, but I was hearing this lecture, that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he chastised very heavily Choda Haridas, because he was in the renounced order, and he had engaged with a lady of the opposite sex. And the story is very vast, we won't get into it. It's also very difficult for us to accept often, because it seems like he didn't really do anything so bad. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was setting the example and using him as an example for everyone around, that if you are in the renounced order, you keep your distance. And it's a subtle fall down to be in that association. So that's one side of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Meanwhile, on the other side, many of, if not the majority of his close associates were grihastas. And he was encouraging them and engaging them and showing his mercy, giving blessings to them to have Krishna conscious children. So it's not that we may hear one thing and we think it's all bad. This is the challenge, that our mentality often drives us to think of everything in black and white, right? That it's like, if he says this, then it has to be like that. But actually, there's so much area in between. It's not so much about the externals, it's more about what's going on inside here. So we have to be clear about what is our consciousness while we're engaging. And this is why the Prabhupada speaks again and again about the Garbhodan Samskar and the principle of before conception, it's about the consciousness. It shouldn't just be an activity like the cats and dogs. Of course, cats and dogs are more regulated than most of the humans in the world. Because humans just, Prabhupada would say, they'll just do it anywhere. You know, like we know the pastime of Ajamil. And he was just walking through the forest and he saw one man and the prostitute trying to engage. Whereas the animals, at least they're regulated in their timings of engaging. But amongst humans, which Prabhupada used this term from Shastra, dupadapasa, which means two-legged animals. He said the humans are basically like two-legged animals. If they're not Krishna conscious, if they're not self-controlled. So we shouldn't, as they say in English, throw the baby out with the bathwater. You have that in French? Yeah. What is it in French?
Jeter le bébé avec l'eau du bain.
Okay. It's the same. Same exactly. So yeah, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, we're not into throwing babies out anywhere, but it means you might want to get rid of the bathwater, but don't forget the essence is there, and as long as we're in the right consciousness, then it can be used in Krishna's service. So sometimes we see that there can be can be very derogatory towards the Grihastha ashram. Sometimes, maybe over the years, so I've heard. Maybe not so much now, but it can be considered like, oh, it's like almost like a fall down to be in the Grihastha ashram, which, in my unhumble opinion, is just complete nonsense, basically. Because actually the Grihastha ashram is one of the most important ashrams. The Grihastha ashram is meant to support all of the other ashrams. So if the Grihastha ashram is weak, then that means all of the other ashrams will also be weak. And most of the people in the world will probably need to go into the Grihastha ashram. It's very rare that people are able to remain like Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur or Naishtika Brahmachari for their entire life. Over the years, myself also was in the Brahmachari ashram for 10 years, and I saw many other brahmacharis come, and we often all start with the same kind of mood, you know, like, sannyas, here I come. For the first couple of years, as soon as I remember I put on saffron and I was like, yeah, you know, all I need is the stick. And you think it's only a matter of time and I'll be there, you know, the next sannyasi, you know. And that's just, whatever it is, maybe a natural thing, but it's not an easy thing to continue in that ashram, in the renounced ashram, because there's such a longing and yearning for association. And I know my Guru Maharaj was once explaining that that remaining in that ashram is completely possible and doable, but one has to be very happy in that ashram and happy with their service, engaged in their service and very, very blissfully engaged in their service, and also has to have very good relationships with the other devotees, with the other brahmacharis in the ashram, and not be so easily disturbed. Now, you know, there's a story from Ramanujacharya's time. I won't tell those story, but the principle of it is that once they were criticizing some grihastas outside, because Ramanujacharya was very, very much connected with Danurdas. Thank you, Danurdas. And and they were kind of criticizing, you know, why are you spending so much time with this householder? And then he said, well, why don't you go and see how attached they are. So he sent the sannyasis around or brahmacharis around to steal their jewelry, to steal their gold, and see how they responded and reacted. And so they went and they snuck in the dead of night and they were stealing the jewelry. And actually the wife was wearing some jewelry and she saw that the brahmacharis from the ashram had come and they were taking the jewelry. And she was thinking, oh no, the temple must be in trouble. They must need it. And so they even took one of the earrings off of her ear. And she thought, now let me turn over so they can take the other one. And so she was assisting them and they didn't resist. And then later, the next day, they went to Ramanujacharya and they said, oh, these brahmacharis came and they were taking the gold. Do you need more? Do you need something else? They were just prepared to give. And so Ramanuja was telling the brahmacharis, he said, but the other day, I think he went in himself personally, and he moved around some of the kopins, that's brahmachari underwear for people who don't know, moved around the kopins and the gumshas, and there was this big fight amongst all the brahmacharis. Who took my kopins? Where's my underwear? Where's my towel? Where's my gumsha? He said, and all of you are fighting over some bits of cloth. So, the point being that we have to be situated properly and not be disturbed to stay in that ashram. Otherwise, it will not be so easy to maintain that life. But most people are probably going to want to have that association, to develop that kind of a relationship. So, no problem, as long as it's done properly and in the correct spirit. So like that. I think probably we should, maybe I can finish now or see if anyone has any reflections or any questions. There's many other things that could be said. Anything else? Anyone? Any chastisements?
It seems that in other religious traditions,
Yeah.
Western, it's not so much put like something great to religious marriage. Like, if you cannot make it, well, okay, which is also. But so is this because we have this positive service to Krishna, that we can speak about sex life and family life in a positive way, because in other tradition maybe this positive service is not so much clear, more like renunciation.
Okay, interesting. So, if I understood you correctly, Prabhu, you're saying that in other religious organizations or institutions or paths that family life is not heralded much as a...
The heroes of renunciation.
Yeah, it's more about those who are in the renounced order, whereas we see it as a service to Krishna.
Yes.
Well, that may be true. I guess it may depend on who you speak to, because sometimes it seems renunciation, of course, is heralded even in our own philosophy over and above the engagement in family life. Family life is something to go through and eventually also give up. So in one sense, renunciation is kind of heralded. I was with at an interfaith gathering once, and I was speaking to some Christians, and I found it interesting, the response I got. Somehow the topic of renunciation and monks and sannyasis and different things like that came up. And then this one lady, she said, actually, it's sinful. She said it's sinful to give up sex life. And she said just the opposite, and more in line with. She said we should see it as a service to God. And she said to try to not bring new souls into the world and give them the opportunity of knowing God, she said, is like sinful, you know. So I guess even in many religions, of course, the principle of contraception is considered sinful. But it's encouraged to engage and bring children into the world. I mean, even from biblical times, all of the oldest traditions, there's an idea of progenitors. You know, Adam and Eve were like the original progenitors. They were like the original mother and father, you know, the first coming together of the man and woman and procreating and creating all of giving life, you know. So I'm not so sure if other religions actually frown upon it so much. But of course, what I would see is in all religions, there's always those who tend to be very renounced. And then the other side is those who tend to be maybe very fallen. I'm not saying grihastas are in that, but there's always those who are just very attached and who are trying to traverse to the other side. So I think there's always that extreme polarization, and then somewhere in between, you know, we may kind of try to find ourselves. That's my thoughts on it. I don't know. It's okay. And okay, Prabhuji?
Also, like Prabhupada distressed a few times about what's going to be happen in Grihastha life. Most of devotees, they take it lightly, in the sense that the ladies here, we speak nicely, nice reciprocation, etc. But they don't foresee that marriage means children, means jewels, means a nice kitchen, nice house, nice all these items that makes Grihastha life possible. And mostly people will not be able to live in a temple like it is in India. Practically no Grihastha are in the temple, living inside the temple. And so they don't foresee all the arrangement to be done that looks a little material, but that are actually spiritual, in establishing a kind of temporary house, or living close to the temple, and also to live, practically speaking, a better life in the countryside. Nobody preaches this, because most of people live in downtown. But the most practical to practice spiritual life is in an easy environment. It's in the countryside, because in the past, in India, it was going on this way.
Yes.
Most of people were Vaishya, living in a small village or like that. Just the economy now made the town like a big mega town, mega hell, where they don't nobody realizes how difficult and opposite to spiritual life it is. So my advice is to people to find a simple job in the countryside near a temple, like here, or in other country. But I mean, migrate from the city life, because city life is conducive to passion, and it becomes less and less secure, and you get ahead bigger like that. And well, of course you make money, but at the same time you have less time to spend it, and spend time to live and have your spiritual life as well.
Very nice. Thank you very much for that. Very powerful. Yeah, very nice points. Thank you. Strong proponent of Grihastha ashram. Prabhu, you had your hand raised?
Yes, thank you very much for the lecture, Prabhu. How do you see, like in many temples, there is this separation between men and Matajis when they take prasadam, and we don't have it here. And how do you see this? What are your suggestions in our situation, and for me as a brahmachari, what is best for my spiritual life, how to...
Yeah, I mean the practicalities are first that I'm not necessarily here to advise how to manage the temple, but I mean in many places that's the custom that what was it Prabhupada said? The extent of the conversation should be please pass the salt. Right? You know what he said? Means it shouldn't be like, hi, how are you? How's your family? How you feeling today? Shouldn't really be like intimate conversation, but please pass the salt sometimes can be like maybe too much. But in general it's in general there's natural separation. Again, Prabhuji's talking about village life, and I know the few times I've been to India, there's more and more mixing and mingling now, but you'll often see the men just go and do their thing, and the ladies just naturally go and do their thing, In fact, traditionally, I guess, while the men are taking, the ladies wouldn't even sit until after the men had eaten. Now, this is traditional culture, and I'm not trying to say it's the way it should be, but I think there's generally a natural kind of separation that's kind of healthy, but at the same time, we see that in Western culture, especially the way that it is now, it can be such a distant thing for people that they can't understand it, handle it, or accept it. And I remember having a talk with his name just went out of my head. Your godbrother from Alachua, he runs the Krishna house. Kalakantapu, yeah. Because he has these Krishna houses, and he has like men and women all living in the place. Of course, now he was sharing with me that over the many years that they've had this house with mixed people living together, he said he could count the inappropriate incidences on one hand in like 15 or 20 years. And actually one of the courses that we did in the GBC college was about preaching to new people. And you had, there were two different persons giving the course. You had Radhe Shyam Prabhu from Pune, Ramnath Maharaj's disciple, who was instrumental in starting what are known as bases. The bases where they would preach to young people, and it would be predominantly men. They would preach to men because he's a brahmachari. Predominantly they were focused on making brahmacharis, but they would preach to young men in school. They would have a place where they would stay. And then the other side of that course was given by Kalakantapu, who completely almost presented a different point. But both things are working and successful. So we have to see how to apply something according to Kala Desha Patra, according to time, place, and circumstance. It's not that we try to force something into... And did Prabhupada do that? No way. He was a sannyasi. The first thing he was doing, even before initiating, was he was getting people married. Right? Before he gave initiation to Mukunda and Janaki, he got them married. So, and sannyasis in general shouldn't be performing wedding ceremonies, what to speak of associating with the opposite sex. But Prabhupada went right into that environment, and he just started making so many exceptions and changing things, because if he didn't, it would not have taken root. And that's the thing that the smarta mentality lacks, and why it was not so successful in India, and no one else was able to do it. And Prabhupada was also heavily... That means time for me to finish. And Prabhupada was heavily criticized by his godbrothers for things that he would do. Mother Malati tells this amazing story in Mayapur. He had all of his godbrothers, senior godbrothers, and Prabhupada was sitting at the end of this one hut. You may have heard this story before. And Prabhupada asked her as a lady to serve. So the room is filled with sannyasis, like 15 sannyasis and Prabhupada. And she's going down serving each plate. and she's got her just like if you go to Vrindavan, you see the ladies in Vrindavan. They don't just cover their head, they pull their sari like fully over their head so it hangs down here. So she said she had it like that, and she was serving each plate. And she could hear the conversation, and they started to say to Prabhupada, why have you got this woman in here serving us? And Prabhupada said, we don't see distinction like that. She is my disciple. And then he made this statement that she would slit her throat for me, and I would slit my throat for her. So therefore, there's no distinction. And it's like Prabhupada did it on purpose. You know? But actually, once we were at in Fogler Ashram in Vrindavan. Every year they have Prabhupada's Disappearance Day festival during the month of Kartik. And it's a huge event. And my godbrothers had started to organize big prasadam for all of the Brajbasis. And all of the mahants from all the different temples, they would come before they would serve the feast to everyone else. So it was like 50, 100, maybe 200 personalities would come, all the top big people from Vrindavan. And I was there offering to help serve. And they told all of us Western people, anyone with white skin or black skin or yellow skin, any skin that wasn't, brown, that we had to just go back behind where the kitchen certain area is. We couldn't even be in the room because they consider all Western people as malechas. What to speak of women? Women weren't anywhere in the vicinity, but even we were told to get lost. So this kind of smarta mentality, you can't have that mentality and go to the West and start preaching to Western people. Prabhupada was able to transcend all of this according to the time, place, and circumstance and apply it. So it's not really for me to say what's best to be done here, but if you're asking as a brahmachari what you should do, I think you should make sure that you're in the right consciousness, that you're not averse. You know what averse means? It means like, I don't want to be near, I don't like, They say aversion and attachment are two sides of the same coin. So, and there's the story of the two monks, and I'll finish with this, who went to cross the river. They were on pilgrimage, and they went to the river, and there was this Mataji trying to cross the river. And they said, I can't get across, it's too high. And one of the monks said, climb on my back, I'll carry you across the river. And he carried her across the river. They got to the other side, he put her down, he offered obeisances, they respects, and they kept walking. And then after about 3 or 4 miles, they hadn't had any conversation. And the other monk, the one that didn't carry the Mataji, he just turned to this monk who carried the lady across, and he said, I can't believe you did that. You know that the monk code is not to even get near a woman. What to speak of you let her body touch your body? And he was so angry. And he said, my dear friend, I put her down on the other side of the river, but you've been carrying her in your mind for the last 5 miles. So this is aversion. That it's like the mind is disturbed, but we should be able to not be disturbed in that presence. But at the same time, there's no harm in making sure you're in a space that's separate or different. I know there's one devotee in London. He's been brahmachari, ever since he joined. Now must be coming up to 30 plus years. Murli Manohar Prabhu, he was the head pujari for many years, like the patron saint. And it's very hard to be brahmachari your whole life. What to speak of be a brahmachari in London your entire life. But he's done it. And he's done it because mainly a few things. Obviously he has a natural tendency. But he also makes sure that his sadhana, he gets his sadhana in every day. He takes shelter of Krishna. Even he's dressing the deities during the whole morning program. You'll see as soon as breakfast finishes, he's like, he has a little nap, then he comes right into the temple room. He sits in the same place looking at the deities, chants all 16 plus rounds in one go, and then he'll go and read. He makes sure that he takes care of himself spiritually. But also, he has this tendency to do what we call, he shuts the shop. Now, he's the head pujari, he's a brahmachari, and no disrespect, but he knows the cycle of all the women in the whole temple and community. Because everyone's texting him, sorry Prabhu, I'm OTA, I can't do my service. So he's perpetually knowing, like, ladies are having their time of the month. He's like dealing with maximum numbers of ladies in the Pujari department. But when you interact with him, the shop's shut. There's no exchange, there's no business going on here. Service is the only business. Otherwise, it's like the shop shutters are closed. I'm not interested in some big long exchange, but okay, you can do the service, Haribol. You can't do the service, Haribol. And then that's it. That's the extent. It's not a whole long, drawn out, oh, is it a difficult time? It's like the shop's shut. I'm not engaging in that. And but it's not false either. You get the sense that he's just genuinely not interested. So we have to be sure that we're genuinely not interested like that, and not, as my Guru Maharaj also said once, don't be someone who's like gritting your teeth, it's like fighting against some natural propensity. Now we may have to do that a little, but it shouldn't be like 20, 30 years of teeth gritting, because then you're going to not have any teeth left. Anyway, I should stop here. I've gone way over time. You told me to finish at 8:45, and I've gone way over. Hare Krishna, Grantaraj, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Nitai Gaura Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol.